I'm gonna teach you in the next hour or so everything that you need to know about relocating to South Florida. This video is gonna save you months of research, hopefully thousands of dollars in potential unnecessary mistakes, and tons of headaches. We're going over everything from the map to where people are actually moving, what they wish they knew before they got here, and how to figure out your perfect area based on your lifestyle before you even think about the house. So get a pen, get a pad, maybe some water, and let's get right into it. All right, so before you decide where to live, you have to understand how the map works and the overall geography of South Florida, because sometimes some things may look close on the map, but in reality, they're really not. So I'm gonna walk you through the entire region from north to south so you don't spend time searching in the wrong areas. This is South Florida. This is the Miami metro area, and it basically can be broken down into 3 different sections, and I'm gonna do my best to kind of draw this out for you here. But we have Palm Beach County, which is basically this right here. We have Broward County, which is this right here. And then the rest of it is Miami-Dade County. Now, each of these counties, extremely different, completely different personalities. And the thing that really makes this metro area different than a lot of other ones is that there's 3 major cities here. And as you can see by looking at this map, everything is gonna be north and south based for the most part. So I mentioned that this is a large area. It's over 6,000 square miles, but only about 1,200 is livable. And that's because this area that you basically see here in white is what's livable. And then everything out here is Everglades. So we got almost 3 million people in Miami-Dade County, about 2 million in Broward County, and about 1.5 or so, somewhere just over 1 million in Palm Beach County. I'll put the numbers on the screen. All that combined into this crammed area right here. So the main highway that you're gonna have here that's gonna basically take you from city to city, north and south, is gonna be I-95, which runs more towards the east side of the metro area and basically ends right past downtown Miami, right past Brickell. The next highway is gonna be the Turnpike, which kind of runs in a weird pattern next to 95, then it breaks out for the most part more towards the central or western part of the metro area, and then connects back to 95 here, but then breaks off here and goes all the way down through Homestead. You have I-75, so it's a very small portion of it in Miami, runs north, and then it breaks off and runs all the way across to Naples. This is what's referred to as Alligator Alley out here. Kind of a scary highway if you ask me. I've never been that far on it. I'm sure I will one day. But this highway basically cuts up and goes through Tampa, and I'm pretty sure it runs all the way up to Michigan or something. These are the main highways in the South Florida metro area. Now, as we get into each county, it kind of breaks down a little bit more. There's some smaller highways in Miami that kind of make connectivity a little bit easier. Some in Broward County, and then in Palm Beach County, basically what you see on the screen is what you're gonna get. And there's one other road, which I don't know if you can see up here, it's US 1. I'm not really gonna be able to draw it, but it runs parallel here to I-95 on the east side, and it runs basically all the way down to the Keys. And I'll explain that when we dive into each area separately. I refer to it as US 1 always because it has different names depending on where you are. Each area has its own international airports. Each area also has its own cruise port. So you have Port of Palm Beach right there. You have Fort Lauderdale, Port Everglades right here. And then down in Miami, of course, you have the Port of Miami. So you are covered with that. Now, since we're down here in Miami, let's start kind of breaking down some of the roads down here in Miami. And if at any point, if this starts to get overwhelming, I know I'm gonna be covering a lot in this video, just pause it, take notes, maybe kind of draw out a map as I go along, whatever you think helps you. But we have Miami, and we'll kind of draw out the highways again. So we have 95, which is your main north and south, ends right there. We have the Turnpike, which connects to 95 or breaks off right here. Goes all the way down towards Homestead. And here now I'll be able to draw out US 1 since it's a little bit easier since we're zoomed in. So we have US 1, like I said, this runs up the east side all the way up. This is basically the end of Miami right there. US 1 in Miami is called Biscayne Boulevard for the most part. And then as you get down to this area, South Dixie Highway. So this is why I said I'm just gonna refer to it as US 1. But then you have these other smaller highways that just make connectivity around the Miami area so much easier. So for example, you have the Dolphin Expressway, which this is the airport right here. You have the Palmetto Expressway, which is a toll road right there. You have I-75 right here. And then you have this, which is a toll road here. And this is the Airport Expressway here, which connects you to the airport. Then you have these little extensions over here, 195, which takes you across to Miami Beach, 395, which takes you to the cruise port and also to Miami Beach. I know, that looks like a lot, but as you can see, connectivity is a lot easier in Miami. Now, just because it's easier to connect in the Miami area because you have more highway options, that does not mean it's gonna be easier. There's also a lot more people that live in this area, a lot more people that work and commute to this area, and a lot more people that are vacationing in this area. So traffic is pretty much a nightmare no matter which one of these highways you're on, except maybe the Turnpike. The Turnpike is that one highway that it's just the best. You have to pay to drive on it, but I will gladly pay to drive on the Turnpike because it's smooth, it's flat. Traffic does not tend to exist too much on the Turnpike. Now, moving out of Miami, we're gonna be in the Fort Lauderdale area now, and I'm gonna kind of show you the same thing. So again, we have 95, which runs all the way down. Now we're back in Miami. We have the Turnpike. Okay, and then we have this portion of I-75, which runs all the way out west and then curves down. And this is kind of the end of Broward County or the Fort Lauderdale metro area. In addition though, we have 595. So this is Fort Lauderdale International Airport right here. So 595 basically starts at the airport, takes you west through the suburbs, and then connects to either I-75, which this will take you out to Weston, or this right here, which is the Sawgrass Expressway, another toll road, which then turns into an arterial road right here and then connects to the Turnpike and I-95. So connectivity is a little bit less in Broward County than it is in Miami, but as you can see, you do still have interstate that runs east and west. But for the most part, for example, if you're living up here in Coral Springs and you work in downtown Fort Lauderdale and you don't want to take the toll roads to work, I mean, you're commuting through all these arterial roads, and this is where traffic tends to get heavy. Also, you have US 1. Now, like I mentioned, US 1 doesn't really function like a typical highway, even though they call it a highway. It's called Federal Highway in Broward County. It doesn't function exactly like a highway. It functions more like a main road with stoplights. The only part that really does function kind of like a highway is this little tiny stretch right here near the airport and the Port Everglades. But the thing about US 1 is that you'll run into some areas where the speed limit's 55, somewhere it's 45, and somewhere it's 35. So traffic does tend to back up on that road. But overall, connectivity as far as highways go does get a little bit better here. Now we're gonna continue up to Palm Beach County, which ends all the way up here at Jupiter. Again, you have 95. You have the Turnpike. This is where things tend to become an issue with east-west travel, because everything going east and west up here is an arterial road with stoplights. This is basically what you have as far as highways go in Palm Beach County. Now, one thing that I also should mention when it comes to commuting is that we do have the localized trains. We have the Bright Line train, and so I'll put on the screen where the Bright Line stops are. We also have the Tri-Rail, which is more of the commuter train, which runs parallel to the Bright Line. It's not a high-speed train, but it has a lot more stops. But again, as far as that east-west transportation goes, you're either looking at driving or you're looking at taking a bus. Now, this is often where things start to get kind of confusing for people as far as when it comes to choosing an area to live. But like I say in a lot of my videos, you want to pick an area based on your big anchor, or what is it that's drawing you into a specific area. And there's really 3 common ones that we're going to cover in here, and maybe it'll help you also learn some areas that you want to stay away from. But there's really 3 common ones, and then maybe a 4th one that I'll throw in there also that I think is important. And the first one, and we've been hearing a lot of this lately, is people want that beach town feel. So when a lot of people say they want to live near the beach or on the beach, especially in the Miami area, they're typically going to Miami Beach. But Miami Beach has some neighborhoods and some areas that are more ideal than others, because if you don't know South Beach, Miami Beach, it's a tourist trap. And a lot of our clients that are reaching out looking for that beach access or that beach style living, they're looking for something walkable. They're looking for something lively, but not chaotic or hectic. Also not necessarily the high rise lifestyle, but I'm gonna show you here in Miami Beach an area that we've been recommending to a lot of people typically is this area down here, which is known as south of 5th. And so it's basically this area here. And this area is really nice. It's a little upscale. It's boutique in some areas. There are some high rises. And it is still a busy area, but it's definitely away from a lot of the madness of South Beach, where you see this park right here. All this and Ocean Drive. This is basically the tourist trap. Basically, this area of Miami Beach is really what's gonna be the most busiest, generally speaking. And then this area right here, that's kind of where you have like all the Art Deco buildings, and that's South Beach. And then also a little bit further north, the Mid-Beach area. These are typically gonna be your calmer areas of Miami Beach. And so in Fort Lauderdale on the beach, you have Central Beach, which is gonna be this area down here. This is where pretty much all your hotels are. This is where spring break happens. But we like to recommend this area based on what a lot of people want, which I mentioned is walkability, lively, but not over the top hectic. So we have Lauderdale Beach, which is actually one of the few areas in South Florida where you'll find single family homes on the ocean. Now the area that we've been recommending the most though is Lauderdale by the Sea. And because it kind of just has basically everything that everybody wants in a beach town. It's very small, it's just over a square mile. It's very lively, but it's not chaotic. And it kind of has that small town charm, if you will, where you're not gonna find any high-rise condos. You may more towards the north end, but the town actually passed a law where condos cannot be built over 4 stories, basically to preserve the small town feel and also protect the views of the ocean. One more that's more recently we've been recommending, and this area is kind of a hidden gem, but it's this Singer Island area right up here. It's technically part of Riviera Beach. You might see the address sometimes, but it's this area here. It's just north of Palm Beach, the island. And then you have the inlet right here. And you're gonna find some high rises, some boutiques up there, boutique buildings, smaller buildings. And it's just a completely different lifestyle. This is more calm, laid back. As far as like nightlife scene or dining scene, I mean, you'd have to go down into like Palm Beach or West Palm Beach for that. So the next thing that a lot of people ask for are areas that are good for families and have good public schools, or even sometimes private schools. And one thing that you should know is that, especially if you're coming from a place like Connecticut or New Jersey, where the schools are rated very highly and they get a lot of funding, it's just not like that down here. And it's not to say that the schools are bad, they just don't get the same type of funding that they do in the Northeast. And you don't typically see as high of ratings throughout the area like you would up there. But I can give you a general framework as far as looking for these areas to where to find those schools. And that's gonna basically be anything west of the Turnpike, for the most part. And that's not to say that there aren't pockets of areas in the cities where there are good schools, there definitely is. But for the lifestyle that a lot of you guys that ask for this are looking for, it's mostly gonna be out west. So a couple of the really popular areas that people look into is Parkland up here. A lot of high rated schools in Parkland. Weston down here, same thing goes. Miramar and Pembroke Pines, basically this whole area out here. Then even in areas like Southwest Ranches, Cooper City, Davie, areas like West Boca, even parts of Central Boca, West Lake Worth, West Boynton, Wellington, and they're more suburban, more master plan communities with amenities. That's typically where a lot of our clients that are looking for that lifestyle choose to live. Now, the next thing that we have a lot of people looking for is gonna be the more modern, urbanized areas, walkable downtowns, whether it's the downtown Miami area or Brickell, which is just south of downtown. I mean, that's, if you basically wanna live in a Manhattan, that's where you're gonna wanna go. But even areas a little bit further north, a little bit more up and coming, Edgewater, Midtown, a little bit north of downtown, a little bit more calmer than Brickell, but still high rises, walkable. Then of course we have downtown Fort Lauderdale, and it kind of has the best of everything, and I'll explain why. Because you have downtown Fort Lauderdale, which is walkable. You have Las Olas Boulevard right here, but then you have all these neighborhoods around here that have single family homes like Victoria Park, Rio Vista, the Las Olas Isles. And I mean, your definition of walkable may be different than mine, but this is all walkable. You have US 1 that shoots straight down the middle. But this general area right here, and even Flagler Village right here, is where you're gonna find your condo living. Even a neighborhood like Sailboat Bend, right here, single family homes, still very walkable to downtown. Tarpon River, same thing. And in Miami, it's a little bit more difficult to do that unless you go to, you know, parts of Coral Gables or Coconut Grove, which aren't walkable to Brickell or downtown Miami, but they're walkable to their own area. And then also, of course, the other one, I mean, Boca, I wasn't gonna include Boca, but you do have the downtown area, or Meisner Park, which is this little area right here, technically downtown Boca, very walkable. There's some single family neighborhoods around there. A little bit more upscale though. Typically when people are asking for modernized or urban, not really looking at Boca, but it is an option. Same goes for Delray. I mean, more of like a small scale walkable area, but downtown West Palm Beach. And there's a lot going on in West Palm Beach right now, a lot of new buildings popping up. So this area, very walkable. I mean, I remember West Palm Beach back when I used to visit down here when I was a kid, and I just don't remember anything too exciting about it. Even when I first moved down here back in 2019, West Palm Beach wasn't that exciting, but now they kind of got a lot going on. And then the next thing that people are looking for is commuting based living. So anywhere that the Bright Line is, which I had already mentioned, is West Palm Beach, Boca, downtown Fort Lauderdale, Aventura, which is right here, which is kind of like that's kind of a hectic area. We don't have too many people who choose to live in that area based on their experience of visiting there. Now, it's a beautiful town. It's got one of the biggest malls in the state, the Aventura Mall. It has the Bright Line station there, but the traffic there is completely insane because, like I said, it's kind of bridging Fort Lauderdale and Miami. Ives Dairy Road on I-95. If you know, you know. If you don't, but you're interested, you'll find out eventually. But then the other one is gonna be the downtown Miami area. Obviously, if you're living there, you probably also work in that area. I don't know many people who would live in downtown Miami but work in like West Palm Beach or something. Most people who wanna live down there, it's because they work down there. But there is the Bright Line station downtown. And you know, we have these areas down here like Pinecrest and Coral Gables and Coconut Grove, and a lot of people are interested in these areas. And we actually just spoke to somebody who a job transfer is taking them down to Coconut Grove, and so they were looking in that general area of Coral Gables. They want something walkable, but they also really like Fort Lauderdale. Now the problem is that, yeah, you can take the Bright Line from Fort Lauderdale to downtown Miami, but then once you get there, I mean, you're kind of stuck because there's no, aside from busing or driving, which if you're taking the Bright Line, you're obviously not gonna be driving. But aside from that, there's no more Bright Line stations. And so hopefully in the future, we start to see more of those pop up. I know they have a plan to build more of a commuter rail along the Bright Line station that will hopefully connect some more of these areas. You know, if you're working in Brickell, but you really love Wellington, I mean, you're over 70 miles away. I promise you we can find a similar lifestyle to Wellington that is much closer to Miami, because you will be sitting in traffic for probably 3 hours each way. And maybe not, but the reason I say that is because there's been times where I've driven from Fort Lauderdale to Miami in rush hour and it's taken me 2 hours, and that's only 25, 30 miles. So you add another 50 miles on top of that, you never know. Now, the last thing that I wanted to mention is waterfront living. And that's basically because that's a very general thing to say. People say, I want to live on the water. I mean, if you look at this map, you can see that there's actually tons of areas to live on the water. I mean, if you look at Weston, there's a ton of lakes there. There's a ton of lakes here. I mean, you have all these canal systems throughout Fort Lauderdale. But waterfront living can mean a lot of different things. Are you wanting to live on the water just because you want to wake up to a nice view and, you know, sit on your deck and just see a lake or see a canal? Or do you have a 40-foot boat? Or do you plan on getting a 40-foot boat that you need to dock and you want to take out to the ocean? Typically, when you're looking for something that you need to dock a boat and take it out to the ocean, we're always going to be recommending something east of US 1, because this is the highest chance of where you're going to find a home with that amount of water frontage and no fixed bridges. Now, there are some fixed bridges east of US 1 in, you know, certain areas, like this little fixed bridge right here, but for the most part, that's where, if you wanted a boat, no matter where you go, whether you're coming up north in Palm Beach County or in Miami, typically you're gonna wanna be looking east of US 1 if you're looking for dock space, unless you decide to dock at a marina because you happen to find a home that you fell in love with somewhere else. You can always dock it at a marina. If you're just looking to wake up to water views, you can still be east of US 1, or you can really be anywhere. You can be in the suburbs and live on a lake. You can still be in East Fort Lauderdale and live on a canal somewhere west of US 1 and still have a small boat. But just wanted to throw that out there, that a lot of people ask us about waterfront properties, and it goes so much deeper than just living on the water. Another thing is new construction. We don't typically get a lot of people looking for new construction out here because we don't typically have a lot of land to build it. But this area up here, this Westlake area, there's a lot of new construction going on up in this area. You're also gonna find that the further west you go, because these are the areas that are less built out. So that's also just something to keep in mind, is new construction. Unless you want a custom build home, you're most likely gonna be out further west. Let's get into the top 8 best areas to live. Why 8? Because it's my video and I said so. And this list is in no particular order, but it's based off where our clients chose to live this past year and exactly why they chose these areas. And it could be a lot to get through, so we're gonna move through this list pretty quickly. So without wasting any more time, let's kick it off with the heartbeat of Miami, AKA Brickell. And I recently just did a full video on this neighborhood, which actually did claim the #1 spot for best neighborhood to live in all of South Florida, per niche.com. But that's not why we're talking about it. The fact is, there is no other neighborhood like this in South Florida, and that's why our client Steve chose to move here. So Steve was from New York, but had been living in Hollywood for the past couple years, and coming from New York City, he had a hard time getting used to that lifestyle shift. Plus, Steve is young, he's in tech, he was already working in Brickell, and he's spending a lot of time there. So that commute was just killing him. Sometimes hitting 3 hours a day round trip, even though it's only 20 miles away. And to avoid all that traffic, sometimes he would just spend the whole day there. Even after he was done working, he would stay there late. And he just didn't really feel like he was getting his money's worth where he was living in Hollywood because he was never home. But like I said, Steve's main thing was the lifestyle change. In New York, he had everything he needed right there within walking distance, or if not within walking distance, he had enough public transportation to get him there quickly. And that's exactly what Brickell is. It's the heartbeat of Miami and the heartbeat of tech and finance. That urban lifestyle, luxury, modern high rises with amenities, walkability, shopping, dining, and nightlife all within 1 square mile. And it's just really ideal for anyone wanting that fast-paced environment. And what draws a lot of people here is just how easy it is to get around, and you can't find this anywhere else in South Florida. I don't care if you talk about downtown West Palm Beach or downtown Fort Lauderdale, it's not Brickell. And yes, both those areas do have some walkability, but it's the public transportation and just the amount of everything you need in such a small area that really separates it from the rest. You have the trains, the Metro Mover, and the buses at a really high level. You're also just east of I-95 and a short drive to the airport. So it's not hard to see why Brickell would take that top spot for the #1 neighborhood to live in South Florida. But at the same time, it's also not for everybody. Some people that come down here who are used to that fast-paced lifestyle, they want a complete change, and that's what brings us to our next area, the polar opposite of Brickell, which is Parkland. Now let's talk about Kunal. He's from Chicago, downtown Chicago, so he had already been living that fast-paced lifestyle, and when he started his home search in South Florida about 3 years ago, he started looking in Miami. But then things changed and evolved over time. He and his wife Andrea had a new baby on the way, and they started thinking a little bit more long-term, a little bit more about their future and their growing family. So when Kunal reached out to me last summer, he had a little bit more of a suburban approach in mind. His main concerns were finding an area that was community focused with top rated schools and finding a large enough home for their future family where they could have a yard and have amenities to meet other families with kids, which was just a bonus on top of that. And as soon as he told me that, Parkland was the first place that came to mind. Now, I've also done a full video on Parkland, but to give you the short rundown, Parkland's a very suburban / rural town with a very exclusive feel. It's probably 90% gated communities, all with top-notch amenities and A-rated schools, so really great place for families. And something very unique about Parkland is that it's pretty much all residential. Aside from a few public shopping centers and just a handful of restaurants, the town is a majority of homes, parks, and just overall greenery, hence the name Parkland. It's also one of the few areas where you can still find new construction single-family home communities in this general area because they still have the space to build out there. Now, unlike Miami, Parkland is not the center of it all. I mean, as far as public transportation goes, you probably won't ever even really see a bus out there. It's actually located in the farthest northwest corner of Broward County, and it's definitely car dependent. You're definitely gonna want a car living in Parkland. But that's one of the things that makes it so special, is that you are tucked away from everything, but still have really good access via the Sawgrass Expressway to get to Fort Lauderdale and the beach in just about 30 to 45 minutes. Now, I know some of these areas may seem kind of foreign to you, and that's exactly why we just released our brand new relocation guide, which goes more in depth into these areas, plus 30 plus pages of shopping, dining, cost of living, transportation, things to do, basically everything you need to start your relocation journey. That's a free download, and you can find the link for that in the description. Now let's head north of Parkland to an area I'm sure a lot of you know, which is Boca Raton, or Boca Raton, depending on who you are. I'm sure I'm gonna get flamed for that in the comments. But Boca's interesting because it's suburban, but it's also a city with a very boutique downtown area, but it's really known for its upscale lifestyle and really extravagant homes. And that's where Robert and Susan come in. Robert and Susan have been living in Fort Lauderdale since, I think, 1970, somewhere in the 1970s, and basically have been empty nesters for quite a while now. Both love to golf and have been members at Coral Ridge Country Club for some time now, and they would frequently visit the Boca Resort for little staycations, I guess you would call them. I think that's what it's called when you take a vacation in your hometown or your own area, basically. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Little vacations at the Boca Resort. But it just didn't make sense for them to stay in this large home when it was really just the two of them anymore. The caveat is that they wanted something new, something fresh, a new area, a new start, but they still wanted to be close to both their kids. So they didn't really want to leave the general area. They just wanted something new. And when it came to putting all these things together, Boca made the most sense for them. The option to keep that upscale style of living, but still be able to downsize while still being on the water, close to the beach, close to their kids, and most importantly, close to the golf course, made it an easy decision. Hopefully I don't get in trouble for saying that. And they love being close to Meisner Park, which is Boca's little boutique downtown area. Not too crazy, but just enough to keep them entertained. Not to mention, Boca's just beautiful all around. Something that really stands out about this town is just how clean and orderly it is. Like, almost like it was purposefully designed that way, which obviously it was. And in addition to Meisner Park, they're just a short distance to the Boca Town Center, which is actually one of the 3 largest malls in the entire state. As far as being close to their kids who live in the Fort Lauderdale area and then another one in northern Palm Beach County, Boca's a great central location to not only both those areas, but just overall to Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and West Palm Beach via either I-95, the Turnpike, or the Bright Line train. But there's so much more to Boca than what I just described, so I suggest you check these videos out, but let's head south a little bit now. I previously mentioned Coral Ridge Country Club, which takes us to our next area of Fort Lauderdale, but specifically the Coral Ridge neighborhood. Now, Coral Ridge is one of Fort Lauderdale's most popular neighborhoods for a number of reasons, but the main reason it drew Stephanie and John there was the boater-friendly atmosphere. It's got a ton of canals, the proximity to the beach and downtown Fort Lauderdale. So John and Stephanie reached out to me early last year, and they had to move quick because of a job transfer. And they were originally just gonna rent something for a year, just to get in something quick. But then they thought about the fact that they would have to move twice within such a short period of time, even though their actual goal was to buy something. So they just opted to buy right off the bat, and time wasn't on our side. They also have 2 young children, so schools were very important. And John would frequently travel to Fort Lauderdale for his job, so he was pretty familiar with the general area. And aside from being on the water for his boat, which he didn't own at the time, but he did tell me he was gonna buy a boat once he moved down here, and he did not lie, he did buy a boat. But aside from being on the water, finding a home with character was also very important to them. They also wanted to be in an area that was really close to everything, but not right in the middle. And they really liked the style of Victoria Park, but it just wasn't gonna work out because Victoria Park is literally right in the middle. It's just outside of downtown Fort Lauderdale, and that's not what they were looking for. But Coral Ridge checked every box. It's located in such a prime area of East Fort Lauderdale, just east of US 1, with 3 points of access to 3 different beaches, 2 malls, and it's about a 15-minute drive from Las Olas and a 5 to 10-minute drive from Wilton Manors. But the fact that it's east of US 1 made it feel like they were in this quiet neighborhood, even though they were so close to everything on their want list. Coral Ridge also happens to be one of the older neighborhoods in Fort Lauderdale, so finding a home with character, it really isn't an issue there. I also mentioned that schools for their young children were really important, and Coral Ridge just happens to be zoned for Bayview Elementary, so it all kind of just worked out perfectly. Highland Beach is our next neighborhood, and this is an interesting place. Think like the Parkland of beach towns, and I'll explain what I mean by that. And I don't think I've ever spoken about Highland Beach before, because there's really not a huge turnover in a town like this, and honestly, it's kind of a hidden gem. And the reason that I say Highland Beach is like the Parkland of beach towns is because it's pretty much 100% residential. It's basically a strip on the Barrier Island, right in between Boca and Del Rey, only condos and houses. And this was perfect for our clients, Josh and Sylvia from Massachusetts. They had rented in Del Rey because they really liked Del Rey, but then they realized it just kind of became a little too hectic for them, but they still liked the idea of it. And they also really liked Boca, but they said Boca was a little bit too commercial. I don't know, that was their words. They basically wanted a small town Florida feel, but they wanted to be in this specific area. Highland Beach wasn't even on their radar until one day they took a scenic ride from the beach in Del Rey to the beach in Boca and discovered this charming small town in between that they didn't even know existed. And one of the coolest things about Highland Beach is that it's one of the few places in South Florida with single family homes on the ocean. Now, when you think of the Miami metro area, you typically don't think of farms and horses and stables, but you do now because our next town is Southwest Ranches. And I have spoken about this a few times, I believe, and the main reason people move to this area is for land. Florida is known to have pretty small lot sizes, and I mean, it's all relative to the size of your home. You can be in a $10 million mansion in Fort Lauderdale, but your neighbor's house could still be right on top of you. And that's exactly what Amir didn't want. Amir reached out to me from North Jersey back when I first started this channel in early 2023. So it was a long process for him. He grew up in a town called Montclair that I'm very familiar with. And he told me that their house when they were growing up, it was on a 50 by 100 foot lot. So if you know how small that is, that's not a big lot at all. And he told me he would always drive through the parts of Montclair with his family when he was a little kid and just look at the nice houses that overlook New York City or the really nice houses on really big pieces of land. So as a kid, he always wanted to own something like that. But living in New Jersey with the high property taxes, it just didn't make sense for him. Now, Southwest Ranches, to give you a little overview, is in Southwest Broward County, about 45 minutes from Fort Lauderdale and 45 minutes from Miami. And it tends to attract equestrian enthusiasts because of the much larger than average lot sizes and ranch style homes. But this isn't your average farm town because you're also gonna find some massive estates out here. There's also some really highly rated schools out here, so you couple that with really large yards and a laid-back atmosphere, and it just makes Southwest Ranches overall a great place for families. But it is kind of out there, and it's a really small town, but it's not dense at all. It has a population of about 7,000 something people, and I forgot how many square miles. I'll put it up on the screen, but it's about 500 or so people per square mile. And so this is a very car-dependent area, just like Parkland. But again, it does offer very easy access to Miami and Fort Lauderdale via I-75. Next up is Pompano Beach. It's been about 2 years since I made a video on Pompano, so I'm kind of long overdue on this. But we have Rob and Samantha, who were a young couple looking for their first home, and they were really drawn to Fort Lauderdale, but for what they wanted and the kind of area they wanted to be in, Fort Lauderdale is just a little bit out of their price range. Now you might be thinking, well, Pompano borders Fort Lauderdale. It's east, it has high-end waterfront homes. What's the difference? Pompano is going through a major redevelopment, and as it stands, much of the town is still fairly old. And it's one of those places that in the long term, it will be worth the investment, and that's ultimately what sold them on settling here. But overall, it's just a great place for anybody, whether you're a first-time buyer or not, who are drawn to Fort Lauderdale but don't necessarily want to pay Fort Lauderdale prices yet. Just like Fort Lauderdale, there's a lot of waterways and canals leading out to the ocean via the Hillsborough Inlet. They recently redid the pier and have plans to build out the downtown area, which has been in the works for, I think, like 20 years now. So in all reality, no one knows when it'll be done. But they also have a few designer condos going up, like the Ritz-Carlton, the Waldorf, and the W. So affordable housing out east, beachfront living, redeveloped pier and downtown area, with a mix of modern and new construction condos and single-family homes with a really laid-back atmosphere. You can't really beat it. And right in between Pompano and Boca, we have the small, tight-knit community of Lighthouse Point. And this is another interesting town because it's a town, but it feels like a neighborhood. But it's actually a town with its own police department and fire department. And that may not seem like a big deal. You might be thinking, well, obviously. Here's the thing. Not all towns or even big cities in South Florida have their own police department. Pompano Beach, prime example. They don't have a police department. They run off the Broward County Sheriffs. So here you have this town of only 2 square miles that feels more like a neighborhood and has its own police and fire department. And that's what drew Natasha and Dennis here. They were looking for more of a suburban atmosphere, but they still wanted to be close to water or on water and close to the ocean. And as far as suburban living in South Florida goes, all the suburbs are pretty much out west, except for Lighthouse Point. And I use the term suburb loosely because, again, it just feels like a neighborhood, part of a bigger town. Aside from the unique homes and canal front living, the one thing that stood out to Natasha especially, which was very unique, was the safety aspect. Now, I'm not talking about crime or anything safety-wise like that, but I'm talking about the police station and the fact that Lighthouse Point actually has cameras at every single entrance and exit of the town. So every car that comes into Lighthouse Point, their license plate is recorded. Same thing goes for every car that leaves Lighthouse Point. Their license plate is recorded. Some people might like that, some people might hate that. Natasha really loved that. Not to mention, they do get to live that suburban lifestyle out east with easy access to I-95, and they're only about 10 minutes from Boca and about 30 minutes from downtown Fort Lauderdale. All right, so you've seen where people are moving. What about those things that maybe catch a lot of people off guard before they actually get here? Myself included. So in this next section, we're gonna talk about the top 10 things that almost nobody tells you until it's too late. Now, like I mentioned, this list comes from topics from our clients that have made the move or things that I've personally realized after making the move almost 6 years ago. And the first thing that you need to know is that it still gets cold down here. And it's been unseasonably cold for a while now. And I use the term cold loosely as I watch a majority of the country suffering from an Arctic blast right now and even some snowfall in northern Florida. We just decided not to participate with any of this. But don't let that 70 degrees fool you. There's been plenty of days over the last month or so where I wake up in the morning and it's in the mid 40s and barely reaching a high of 55, with today being one of them. I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, but it's pretty cold out here right now. As we speak, it's only about 50 degrees, maybe mid 50s. When I woke up this morning, the real field temperature was 43. And some of you may be watching from other states like, oh, come on, give me a break. But the truth is that the longer that you live down here, the harder it is to deal with this type of cold. But here's the thing, this only happens for a short period out of the year. The rest of the year or the rest of the winters are mild, like you saw on that map, in the 70s, sometimes the low 80s. And this is truly what we live down here for. You can get heat anywhere. It's the mild winters that we love, and if it drops down to the 50s or the 40s a couple times, so be it. And speaking of heat, the second thing that you should know is that the heat is bearable, but the humidity is real. That's the silent killer, and a lot of people underestimate it. This also means that AC is not optional here. It's mandatory. So if you're the type of person who loves heat but hates humidity, South Florida is probably not the place for you. I'm also convinced that the humidity plays a factor when it's cold. Now, I'm no meteorologist or anything, but I've noticed that when I go to visit my family in Denver, where it's extremely dry, no humidity whatsoever, that when the temperature reaches the low 40s, even the high 30s, I can go outside in a long sleeve t-shirt and be completely fine. But out here, it drops to 55. And we all lose our minds. But the real killer is the summertime when the temperatures are already high. I'm talking 80% humidity. The air just feels different. Now, I personally like the humidity. I think it feels good on my skin, but there are definitely times when it feels unbearable. But it's really only about 4 months out of the year that we deal with that, which also happens to be hurricane season. So that really just means that we get a lot of rain and a lot of tropical storms, which just makes the humidity worse in general. But look at the bright side. Humidity means no dry skin and no random nosebleeds. I'm talking to everybody in the Southwest and Colorado. And speaking of beautiful weather, you will become more active outdoors. I mean, I'm at this park right now, and like I said, it's pretty cold out here, but there's still people outside getting it done, working out, walking, running. You're just gonna adopt more of an outdoor lifestyle. But it really is because of the beautiful weather and the fact that you have access to it all year long. Especially when you first move out here, you're probably gonna wanna do everything outside. And that's how I was when I first moved out here. And I've told this story before about how I literally wanted to do everything outside. So I would take my computer outside and work and sit in the blazing hot sun. And then I realized that after a couple times of my computer overheating, that probably wasn't a good idea. But even just the simple things like going to the beach, going for walks, biking, outdoor yoga, outdoor gyms, you'll most likely just naturally be finding yourself getting outdoors more. And then of course there's things like paddle boarding and kayaking because we have the access to water here. Now this was personally probably one of the biggest blessings for me. Not only does the sun improve your mood, but just being outdoors in general also led me to getting in really good shape. Now, if you've been a follower of this channel for some time, you probably know that I've lost close to 90 pounds in the last 12 years, and a majority of it came off and stayed off once I moved down here. Now, obviously, a lot of that was just due to eating right and working out and figuring out what actually worked for me, but I found myself outside a lot more often, just walking every day, and I contribute a lot of that to that right there. Something else that I learned after moving here is that South Florida is huge, and there's so much more to it than just Miami. It covers an area of over 1,200 square miles. That's livable area. There's over 6 million people here, putting it in the top 10 largest metro areas in the entire country. And a lot of people, when they first decide they want to move down here, they just think Miami because that's what they know South Florida as. But once you spend some time down here and actually start exploring the metro areas, you'll realize that you can live in Miami without living in the city of Miami, or you can live in Fort Lauderdale without living in the city of Fort Lauderdale, if that makes any sense. You might love the idea of living in Miami, but the city life just doesn't quite fit your lifestyle, which brings us to our next point, which is the area that you choose to live can have a major impact on your day-to-day life. And now this might be the most important topic in this entire video. And this is where proper research and planning come into play. But hey, if you're watching this video, that means you're already in the right place. And if you're new here, I have an entire library of videos covering what life is like in South Florida, breaking down different areas and neighborhoods. So make sure to hit that subscribe button. But one thing that gets a lot of people, myself included before I moved here, is from the outside looking in, all of South Florida kind of just looks the same. But once you spend some time here, you'll quickly realize that each county, each town, and even each neighborhood has its own unique vibe that attracts people for very specific reasons. And we have our systems and processes that will help you figure that out. But let's talk about how choosing the right area to live can impact your day-to-day life. And we'll just use your daily commute as an example. Let's say you land a job in Brickell, downtown Miami, but you're not really a city person, and you fall in love with the equestrian lifestyle in Wellington, which is closer to West Palm Beach, but about 70 miles away from Miami. That's a minimum of 3 hours every day round trip, not to mention the wear and tear on your car. You can consider public transportation, take buses to the train, but that could easily double your commute time. Now you're looking at 6 hours round trip on top of your 8-hour workday. If you sleep 8 hours a night, that leaves you with 2 hours left in the day. Now, of course, that's a very extreme example, but it's just to prove a point that this will likely be the most important decision you make on this journey, and you need to figure out what the most important factor to you is about the area you want to settle in before you even think to start looking at homes. Is it living a certain lifestyle, commuting, kids' schools, even just having access to certain things? We had a client whose biggest priority was being in a neighborhood that was close to a Whole Foods. That's what was important to them. So snowbird season is very real. It's not a myth. It's real. And if you aren't familiar with what it is, it's when the part-time residents all flock down to Florida at the same time to escape the cold, basically. And there's both positive and negatives to this. And a lot of the locals, or the natives, I should say, they don't really like this. And I can understand why. Traffic increases quite a bit. It's definitely noticeable. There's congestion at all hours of the day. Everyday life is just more crowded, whether it's the beach, the grocery store, or restaurants. But there also is a lot of good that comes out of it. This is when the economy really thrives down here with all that extra contribution. And it's also just a good opportunity to find seasonal work to handle all that extra influx of people. And in addition to snowbirds, South Florida is just a vacation hotspot, so there's really tourism and extra people here all year round. And while it does die down a little bit in the summer months, it doesn't really end. And this is just something that comes with living in a destination hotspot. But like I mentioned, this is really when our economy thrives, and there are perks to it, like finding extra work if you need it. And speaking of work, the job market down here is booming, but in certain industries. Some people do find it a little bit harder to find a job down here, or maybe a job that pays as well as where they're coming from. But there's been a ton of growth here in the last 5 years, and the main industries that really drive the economy down here and have been for a long time is hospitality and healthcare. Hospitality will always be a major power player in this economy, being that we're in a vacation hotspot. It's tourist heavy throughout the year and a major international market for not only business, but leisure too. Tech and finance have also seen massive growth. Most of this is taking place in West Palm Beach and Brickell. Let me just say, West Palm Beach, you need to keep an eye on that city. It's not just this sleepy town for retirees anymore. The growth there has been insane and will continue to grow, and I'll actually be releasing an entire video on why Palm Beach is about to boom very soon. Now, something else that you probably already know about Florida is that it's one of the few states with no income tax. But there's a catch. And this is one of the biggest things that draws people to Florida in general, especially for retirees and just high income earners. You get to keep more of your paycheck compared to states with high income taxes like New York or California. Business owners and remote workers aren't taxed on their earnings at the state level, and a lot of retirees flock to Florida because they're not taxed on their Social Security benefits or pension. But just because there's no state income tax does not mean that living in Florida is cheap, because they make up for it in other areas like property taxes. Now, while Florida's average property tax rate is about 0.8%, it's gonna vary depending on the county and even the city that you choose to move to. And it's much higher in South Florida. If you buy in a brand new community, taxes can be higher than an old established neighborhood, due to the lack of infrastructure, covering costs for things like building the roads and the sidewalks and the amenities. But I don't want to get too deep on this topic because I did just make a cost of living video where I did go in depth on this, and I'll link that right up here. Insurance can also be pricey and complex, but despite what you may hear, it's not impossible to get. Unlike other states where you may only need a standard homeowner's insurance policy, down here in Florida, you most likely need multiple policies, like your standard homeowner's insurance, windstorm coverage, which will cover damages from storms, hurricanes, and then maybe flood insurance. And if you live in a high-risk zone, that means higher premiums. So how close you are to the coast, if you're in a flood zone, and if your home is up to code and has storm protection, will all have an impact on how much you pay. And just in general, Florida has seen a rise in insurance premiums, basically just due to an unstable insurance market. Most of the national carriers have left the state, which caused increased premiums, in addition to a lot of fraudulent claims, particularly related to roofing. See, it's cold out here. I can barely even talk. And because of this, Citizens, which is Florida's state-run insurance carrier, basically the last resort, has pretty much taken over. So yes, while it is complex and could be challenging, it's not impossible whatsoever. And despite everything we just talked about, relocating does not have to be stressful. And I get it. It can feel stressful. It can be overwhelming. It's a big move. I did it. But it doesn't have to be as stressful as you might think it does. We talked about proper planning and finding an area first that aligns with your lifestyle. And breaking the process into smaller steps also helps just make it more manageable. If everything we've talked about so far kind of feels overwhelming, don't worry, it's okay. This next section is gonna tie everything together with the most common questions that I get asked about relocating. Where should I live in South Florida? And that's a loaded question. It's very subjective, and it's gonna depend on a number of key factors that we go over on our one-on-one Zoom calls. But I wanted to take a different approach this time because when it comes to choosing an area, South Florida is so diverse. So it really all comes down to your lifestyle and some really important questions that you need to ask yourself, like, what is your big anchor? What is the main thing that will draw you to a specific area? Do you need to commute? Are schools a priority? Do you prefer a fast-paced city or a more urban suburban area like Boca? Do you want amenities? Do you need ocean access? Or do you like your neighbors being a mile away from you? And this is really important before you just get on Zillow and start typing in your criteria for a home and then just basically throwing a dart at a map. Because at the end of the day, the home you choose is something you can control. You can customize it, you can renovate it, but the location that you choose, you're stuck there. You can't customize the location. And sometimes we think we want something that doesn't necessarily fit our lifestyle, like our client Mark, who came down here about 2 years ago from New York City, and he was convinced that he wanted that fast-paced lifestyle like he was used to. And we looked at a couple of really nice luxury condos in Las Olas, and then there was this energy shift, almost like a look of confusion on his face. But he started asking about things like traffic and noise levels and transient people like tourists, things that come with this type of lifestyle. So we had to revisit those key questions from our initial conversation and just dig a little bit deeper. Mark works from home, so commuting wasn't an issue. He didn't need to be in the city. And it turns out he valued his privacy and space more than he thought he did, and having a yard with a pool was actually more important to him than being somewhere busy and walkable. But he does like to socialize, so naturally Fort Lauderdale or Miami just made sense at first, like it does for a lot of people. So the idea of a master plan community in the suburbs never even crossed his mind. Long story short, Mark now lives in a 3,500 square foot home in a gated community in Boca, the complete opposite from what he thought he wanted. And he still gets to socialize at the clubhouse or the pool and drives 30 minutes to Las Olas on the weekends when he feels like it. But he has that space and privacy and peace that he didn't even really know was important to him at first. So the moral of the story is that what you think you want and what actually fits your lifestyle can be two different things. And taking the time to figure this out before you actually start looking at homes will probably be one of the most important decisions that you make. Let's talk about affordability. Another common question is, what will my budget get me? Again, a very subjective question, but this is the part of our initial discovery call where reality really sets in for a lot of people. And if you're watching this video, I want to give you as much information as I can without overloading you, just so you kind of know what to expect. And you may be hearing that home prices are dropping in Florida, or there's a mass exodus going on here, so inventory's through the roof. And while yes, that is true in certain towns and certain areas, big picture, prices aren't dropping. In fact, over the last year, the average home price in the Miami metro area grew over 16% for single family homes. And the median home price is about $670,000. And a good rule of thumb, the closer you are to the coast, typically the pricier the home. So the further inland you go, the more affordable homes are. But to kind of make this easier for you, a similar framework applies to when you're choosing an area for choosing a home, that you have to ask yourself some really important questions. What are the needs and what are the wants? AKA the things that you're willing to compromise on. And there's really three things that we look at when it comes to needs and wants, which is size, condition, and location. We don't really focus on the price because the price is the price, and unless you have an infinite amount of money, you're probably only comfortable spending a certain amount, or you're only qualified to spend a certain amount. If you have your price and location in mind, but you're not really finding what you're looking for, are you willing to compromise a little bit on size and condition? If you have your price and your non-negotiable is a fully turnkey, move-in ready, renovated home, are you willing to compromise on size and location? And if you have a family of 5 and you need a home that's a certain size, are you willing to compromise on condition or location? Now, sometimes these things do line up perfectly and you may not have to compromise. Another very common question we get is, what can I expect with insurance? Will we even be able to get it? And that seems to be the common misconception here, is that insurance is impossible to get, which it's not. The real concern is, how affordable is it? And what's gonna happen down the road? You may have heard me talk about some of our clients who have left Florida because either their carrier dropped them for some reason, or they left the state, or their premium just skyrocketed, basically forcing them to make a tough decision. But many of these people got hit really hard on what they were willing to pay or what they could even afford to pay. And this all happened because of too much litigation. Insurance companies were forced to pay for it, so they started dropping like flies, leaving the state and leaving homeowners with fewer options, so naturally prices went up and service went down. But we have seen some improvement and some stabilization, as the state recently just approved more than 10 new carriers to enter the market. But despite this, there are still people being affected by what happened in the past. Now, obviously we want the best and we hope that more carriers enter the market in the future, but as of right now, you shouldn't fear that getting homeowners insurance is unattainable down here. Another thing that makes it more of a complex situation for some people is that most states may only require one type of policy, whereas in Florida, you may need multiple policies. You have your standard homeowners insurance policy, windstorm coverage, which protects from storm damage, and then potentially flood insurance. But despite all this, there are ways to mitigate costs by having certain type of storm protection, or buying a home that was built up to code, or just avoiding high-risk flood areas. And while we're on the topic of flooding, let's talk weather and hurricanes, because I know a lot of people fear hurricanes and flooding, especially after seeing the last 2 devastating storms that hit the Tampa area in northern Florida this past year, Milton and Helene. And the reality is, South Florida is just prone to hurricanes and flooding. It's just the reality of life down here. But from personal experience, we haven't experienced anything devastating in the 6 years that I've lived here, but we do get tropical storms frequently throughout the summer months that do cause some short-term flooding, or the King's Tide in the fall. But it's more so flooding in the streets or in some yards. It's very flat here, and the low elevation doesn't really leave a lot of space for water to drain naturally. So during these short bursts of rain, the canals and drainage systems, they just get overwhelmed and there's nowhere left for it to go but to collect in the streets. Now, if you live in a high-risk flood zone, obviously it can be more of a concern. And there are certain areas that are just more prone to flooding, like the low-lying coastal areas and some of the older pockets with older infrastructure where the drains can clog pretty easily and just cause more severe flooding. And we don't expect you to know where all of these areas are, but if this is a concern for you, we can just check the flood maps and of course highlight any areas that are high-risk flood zones. Okay, so what's the job market like? Will I be able to find work? This is another common one I hear a lot. And it's not so much of can you find a job, it's more so will you find a job that pays well, or at least pays enough for you to live down here. And I'm not saying you can or can't, but we have had clients that came from areas like New York, Chicago, or LA, and they took a hit on their salary moving down here. And not having state income tax does help alleviate some of that pressure for some people. But overall, South Florida's job market is booming, with an unemployment rate of 2.8%, which is below the state's overall rate of 3.4% and the national rate of 3.5%. And as far as what industries are booming down here, these are all stats directly from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, but some of these major industries are education and health services, construction, hospitality, and then professional and business services like tech and finance, especially in West Palm Beach and Brickell. Now, I'm no economist, so I can really only tell you what the data says, but one thing I can confidently tell you is to figure out your job situation before you move down here. It's not worth the risk to move down here and wait and then potentially find out you may be taking a pay cut or may not even find a job at all. But if you are gonna go that route, which I'll never advise, but maybe you have some savings, at least do your research so you know what the potential pitfalls are, then just make note of all these things. All right, if you made it this far, I commend you. I know that was a lot of information, but that tells me that you're really serious about this move. And this next part is by far the most important, and that's scheduling your one-on-one free Zoom call so we can go deeper on your goals, your wants and need in an area and a home, and what it actually looks like to buy a home down here. So you can scan this QR code now to book a call or click the link in the pinned comment below, and we'll see you on the next video.